The Nebraska Sandhills roll endlessly, a boundless expanse of prairie under an ever-changing sky. Out here, the wind carries more than just the scent of wildflowers and dirt. It carries whispers of secrets buried so deep, even time struggles to unearth them. There's something about the isolation, the raw, unyielding solitude that allows the darkness in people to grow unchecked. This is where our story takes us today, to a remote farm far removed from any town, where a gruesome murder becomes the centerpiece of a mystery that twists and turns like the dirt roads leading to its doorstep. The Deacon family farm lay miles from the nearest neighbor, nestled in a shallow valley. From a distance, it looked like any other homestead, a house with peeling paint, a sagging barn, and fields left fallow for far too long. But those who lived nearby, sparse as they were, avoided the place. It wasn't the kind of fear born from folklore or superstition. No, it was more practical than that. Workers who took jobs on the Deacon Farm often didn't stay long, and the reasons they gave when they left were vague at best. Something about the air feeling heavy, the nights too quiet. Caleb Stokes had no choice but to take the job. He was a drifter, one of countless men wandering the country in the early 1980s, looking for work where he could find it. When he saw the flyer posted in a diner, farmhand wanted, room and board included, he tore it down without a second thought. The job offered little pay, but it was a roof over his head, a place to eat, and a chance to forget the life he'd left behind. When Caleb arrived at the Deacon Farm, he was greeted by Jedediah Deacon, the patriarch of the family. Jed was a wiry man with skin like weathered leather and a gaze as sharp as a hawk's. His handshake was firm but brief, his words even briefer. Jed's son Wyatt stood nearby, leaning against the barn with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Wyatt was in his 20s, broad-shouldered and silent, his eyes cold and calculating. The third member of the household, Jed's wife Edith, was nowhere to be seen, though Caleb later learned she'd been bedridden for years, rarely leaving her room. The work was hard, but Caleb had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the unease that crept into his bones every time he stepped foot in the barn. It wasn't just the smell, though the pungent odor of animal waste and rotting wood was bad enough. It was the oppressive silence. During the day, the barn should have been alive with the sounds of livestock and the rustling of hay, but it was eerily still, as if the animals themselves were holding their breath. Then there were the tools. Scattered haphazardly across the barn floor and hanging from the walls were implements of the trade, pitchforks, scythes and shears, but each one seemed more menacing than the last. The bale spear, in particular, caught Caleb's eye. Mounted to a rusting tractor, its twin prongs gleamed in the dim light like fangs. The first sign that something was truly wrong came on Caleb's third night at the farm. He awoke to the sound of footsteps outside his window, slow and deliberate. At first, he thought it was Wyatt doing a late-night check on the animals, but when he peeked through the curtains, he saw nothing but darkness. The next morning, Caleb mentioned it to Jed, who dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Coyotes," he said. "They're always nosing around." But Caleb wasn't convinced. One night, unable to sleep, Caleb decided to investigate the barn. He brought a flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the blackness. As he moved deeper into the structure, he noticed something odd. A section of the floorboards had been pried up and hastily nailed back down. His curiosity got the better of him, and he fetched a crowbar from the wall. What he found beneath the floor chilled him to the core. Bones, dozens of them, too small and delicate to belong to cattle. Caleb wasn't an expert, but he knew human remains when he saw them. His first instinct was to run, to leave the farm and never look back, but something stopped him. He needed answers. The next morning, Caleb kept a close eye on Jed and Wyatt, looking for any sign that they suspected him. He noticed how Jed avoided the barn altogether, and how Wyatt's gaze lingered on Caleb a little too long during breakfast. It was as if they were waiting for him to make a mistake. That evening, Caleb decided to confront Wyatt. He found the younger man in the barn, leaning against the tractor, the bale spear looming behind him. Caleb asked him about the bones, about the workers who had come before him. Wyatt's expression didn't change, but his hand slid to his belt, where a hunting knife hung in its sheath. "What you found under there?" Wyatt said, his voice low and even. "Ain't none of your business." Before Caleb could react, Wyatt lunged at him. The two men struggled, their shouts echoing through the barn. Caleb managed to grab a pitchfork and thrust it at Wyatt, knocking him back. In the chaos, Wyatt stumbled and fell against the tractor. One of the bale spear's prongs pierced his chest, pinning him like a butterfly to a board. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb stood frozen, his breath coming in ragged gasps as blood pooled beneath Wyatt's lifeless body. But the nightmare wasn't over. As Caleb turned to leave, he heard the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Jed stood in the doorway, a shotgun in his hands. "You should have left well enough alone," Jed said. What happened next was a blur. Caleb ducked as Jed fired, the shot tearing through the barn wall. He grabbed the crowbar and swung it at Jed, knocking the gun from his hands. The two men grappled, but Caleb's desperation gave him the upper hand. He struck Jed with the crowbar, leaving him crumpled on the ground. Caleb didn't wait to see if Jed was dead. He ran to the house hoping to find a phone, but instead he found Edith. She sat in her bed, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't say a word as Caleb grabbed the rotary phone and dialed the police. By the time the authorities arrived, the barn was engulfed in flames. Caleb had set it alight to destroy the evidence, knowing it was the only way to ensure the truth came out. Or so he thought. When the fire was extinguished, investigators found no trace of the bones Caleb had discovered. The floorboards were intact, the space beneath them empty. Jed's body was gone, and Wyatt's corpse was unrecognizable in the ash. The Deacon Farm was left abandoned, a charred ruin in the middle of nowhere. To this day, no one knows what really happened there. And Caleb's story remains a chilling reminder of the secrets that can lurk in the most unassuming places. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Artificial Evidence. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us bring more chilling cases to light. Join us next time as we delve into another mystery, another case that may not be as it seems. Until then, remember, the algorithm knows.